Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to another episode of Golondrinas Live Sessions. I'm Laura Gonzalez, Education and Volunteer Manager here at El Rancho de las Golondrinas, Santa Fe's premier living history museum. We're located in the beautiful and historic La Cienega Valley. Today, we are joining you from our exhibit hall, and our Curator of Collections, Amanda Mather, is taking us behind the scenes into the exciting world of museum artifact collections to talk about how museums, specifically living history museums like El Rancho de las Golondrinas, manage, maintain, and use the artifacts in their collection in things like educational, hands-on history programming. To ensure that you have the best viewing experience, make sure to adjust the volumes not only in your viewing devices, but also within the film screen itself. And please post any questions that you have into the comment section, and Amanda will get to those at the end of her presentation. And now, without further delay, I am very pleased to welcome our Curator of Collections, Amanda Mather.
Hey, guys. So I wanted to talk about a very particular kind of collection that we have at Las Golondrinas because we are a living history museum. A lot of museums, art museums, for example, don't have a lot of things that people get to touch or use or, engage with. You stand there, you stare at the pretty picture, you take a couple steps, you stand there, you stare at the pretty picture, and so on and so forth. But because we are a living history museum, we're interpreting the everyday lives of the people that lived here in New Mexico. And so we have this whole collection of things that we want our visitors to touch and engage with and use so that they can learn about the people that lived here before and the physical objects that they used in their lives. So, for example, we would have a book that people could look at in our schoolhouse and imagine what the kids would have been reading inside of the schoolhouse. We have yarn for weaving to show people how people weaved here in New Mexico. Pottery that would have been everyday wear for the people that lived here, that would have cooked in it, stored in it, etc. Maybe some tobacco that would have been sold inside of the general store here in New Mexico. And this is a piece of micaceous pottery that would have been a Pueblo influence piece that would have been very common in Spanish households in New Mexico. And then in particular, I want to talk about an object that is near and dear to my heart, the Mano and Metate, which we have in almost every single kitchen here at Las Golondrinas. The reason is that this is probably the most ubiquitous food preparation object found in the Southwest. And it's been used here in New Mexico households for the past 5,500 years. So I wanted to talk about this object in some detail. First and foremost, there's really two varieties of Mano Metate that you see in the Southwest. One is this variety. It's made of a very particular kind of basalt called vesicular basalt. And vesicular basalt is created when magma rises up through the earth, comes to the surface, and there's bubbles that are in it when it basically solidifies. So the thing that's awesome about vesicular basalt, particularly if you're grinding something like this, is that it does have all these little pock marks that make it a heck of a lot easier to grind down thick, heavy grain, such as corn. So these you see, once folks here started using agriculture in particular, you start seeing these objects made out of vesicular basalt in particular. And then the other kind, which we see here at Las Golondrinas as well, is made out of often slate or sandstone. This one is sandstone. Now, why, you ask? Well into a historical period in New Mexico, people relied on wild food plants. Say, anyone who's ever picked piñon and get sap in their hair knows what that's like. So grinding those things on vesicular basalt is no fun. Anything that's sticky, anything that's oily, say herbs, if you're a curandera, you were gonna need this kind of Mano and Metate to grind that stuff. So you will also see these ubiquitously in New Mexico and the Southwest for people that used it for different wild plant foods. And even though the Spanish brought with them mills. People continued to use vesicular basalt to grind corn because A, they liked it the old-fashioned way. They didn't like the milled corn. B, it was too expensive for them to get it grind in town. And C, sometimes people lived so far out that it would make no sense to drag all of their corn miles and miles and miles when they could do it at home, and they knew how to do it at home. So these continue to persist, and certainly in ancestral pueblos, both of these types of objects exist to this day. So that is my deep love of these two objects, and if you guys have any questions for me, go for it. Should I put these back on, Laura?
Yeah, I can stand over here, so if you want to keep the mask down,
Okay.
that's fine too.
The masking.
So I have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, what's up?
You mentioned that the Manos and Metates came in around the same time as agriculture. Is that my understanding correct?
So they came in during the Archaic period, which is at about 5,500 years ago, or 3,500 before Common Era, BCE. People would have used these objects for wild food before we started relying on agriculture. Once we started relying on agriculture, this variety, right, the corn grinding variety, would have become much more common. But people have been using these for a very long time to use wild plant foods.
And so you mentioned particularly the one of the sandstone. I'm curious because on a trip that I took several years ago to one of our national parks, the ranger talked about the use of sandstone in grinding corn specifically, and how it led to one of the the number one or two causes of death among the Pueblo communities. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I'm sure you can imagine, if you stick your main food source on this big chunk of rock and then grind it with this other big chunk of rock, you're going to create a lot of grit. And that grit is going to get into your food, and that food is going to wear your teeth down to a nub, which is what happened. Another thing that has been interpreted as far as when agricultural communities really became agricultural communities is you can see, particularly in the skeletal remains of women, that they have this chronic injury in their joints because they are doing this all day long on their knees. And so you can see all of the sort of osteoarthritis building up. But between their teeth and the osteoarthritis, yeah, it caused a lot of pain and damage, I'm sure.
Do you happen to know the average life expectancy?
I think it's around 35 to 40.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So we'd all be in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. I'd been long gone by now.
So Amanda, you mentioned that these have pretty much consistently for hundreds and hundreds of years has been part of New Mexican life and society. And you said that these are still used in New Mexico households today. Is it on a much smaller scale, like herbal uses?
Yeah, I mean, like curanderas will certainly continue to use these objects when they're grinding whatever they need for their formulations. And then in Pueblo cultures, they're used ceremoniously, during different feast days, etc. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, they're very common. And any of our viewers who have visited Las Golondrinas have no doubt, if they haven't gotten on their hands and knees and actually tried the grinding out, they have seen them on display in several of our buildings. Can you tell us how many sets or how many Manos and Metates? Let's put you on the spot there. Las Golondrinas has in our collection.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think 10, 11, because there's one in Grandma's house.
11, that's
Yes.
a great number. And are there any that have a really special story or particularly unique or special?
You know, I always think the sandstone ones are really interesting because it's, I think, a thing that people don't think about, that you would need these two totally different tools for very different reasons. And the sandstone ones you just don't see as often, not only like at our museum, but in the archaeological record. So I always think when you find one, it's really special because it makes you think about all the different wild plant foods that they must have been using and utilizing in their everyday lives with these objects, which is awesome.
Are archaeologists able to determine, is there any kind of residue left on the metates that they find?
You
can
can
determine
certainly
what
do
foods?
analysis on them and see
Okay.
what was actually ground. You can do that with objects like this as well. When we find pieces of pottery, they can do chemical analysis to see what was actually used inside of these objects. The other thing I wanted to talk about, speaking of things that are special or different, this piece is actually Mexican. So another thing I wanted to say was that there are styles that differ between different cultures and different places, geographical locations. This would not actually be a metate that would be used in New Mexico. You can tell, I'm gonna try to lift this, wish me luck, because it has this little step here. So these would not have been used in New Mexico. The ones that you would see in New Mexico were ones like this, more simple form. But these tend to be Mesoamerican. And some of the ones you see in Mexico have 3 little legs instead of just the one. So this one probably, in fact, I'm sure came from Mexico.
I think some people might be familiar with the style you're talking about. They're used a lot in chocolate grinding. Is that
Right,
correct?
exactly.
We've had a demonstration
they're very distinct
or two.
style, usually with the 3 legs. And that's sort of a later Mesoamerican style of metate.
So I'm curious about the process of that, making 3 legs. Obviously that takes some carving, some craftsmanship. So tell me a little bit about the process on who is finding the proper stones, who is turning them into manos and metates. Is this something that was predominantly men or women?
It would have been, because this was really a tool of women, would have been women who were probably finding it. Because if you use a tool every day, you know the right stuff, right? So they would have probably been the ones going out there finding these things and then dragging them across the landscape back home, which, as a person who's picked up many of these in archaeological context, I can tell you is not a ton of fun. But yeah, I would think it would be women who would have done that. As far as the carving is concerned, that is a question I don't have an answer to, but I don't know.
I wonder if some of the more simpler ones, like the sandstone one there on your left, if that was maybe just, you make a metate by just using it and grinding into it.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, another really interesting thing that you can see in the archaeological record is with vesicular basalt, metates and manos, they will peck back into the rock. So they'll get real smooth and then they'll say, okay, well, I got to make this more sort of bubbly to make it better to grind with. So you can see where they've actually repecked the stone so they could use it again. And that includes the mano and the metate, where you can see that they've actually sort of re-honed them to be better tools.
And what other tools did they use to do the pecking?
That is a good question. I don't know. I mean, you would think it'd have to be something stronger than the basalt itself. So maybe like a quartz material or a granite. I don't know. We'd have to look at firsthand interpret, see if we could find any firsthand.
I wonder if quartz is maybe strong enough. I'm
Good
trying to think
question.
of natural materials that
Granite,
here
I
in
would
New Mexico.
think would be stronger. But yeah, it'd be a good question. I don't know.
And are most metates in collections across New Mexico, are they going to be these 2 types of the vesicular basalt and the sandstone, or are there other rocks as well?
The other material that we will see used commonly for this type, for the smoother type that was used for the wild plant foods, would be slate, because it is so smooth. So that would be the other one that I've ever seen would be slate.
Very interesting. The next question I have is kind of regarding the societies that use this. So this is predominantly our indigenous communities, the Pueblo ancestors of New Mexico, the Southwest, Mesoamerica. Are these objects that we might find in other parts of the United States, or are they really exclusive to the Southwest?
As time wore on, corn became a food that was used by native populations across the continent. So you would probably see some kind of grinding device. I don't know, since I know, I've been stuck in the Southwest for so long. I don't know a ton about what they would have used as far as grinding, but my assumption would be they'd have to use something similar. There might be stylistic choices that they made, or other ways that they did it, say almost like a mortar and pestle, but they would have needed something to grind. So, but as far as I know, these are really an object of the Southwest and Mesoamerica.
Gosh, they're beautiful. And I'm wondering I think people can probably still find these today. You know, they buy a piece of property somewhere in New Mexico. I know several people, native New Mexicans, that have found some just, digging in their yard.
Absolutely.
I mean, are these fairly common? That should people kind of keep an eye out for them? And if somebody finds one, is there a process of what they should do?
They are incredibly common. And I think part of that was because when, say, one broke or kind of outlived its life, people would leave them. You don't want to take this with you because, for obvious reasons. So yeah, they're very common. Wherever people were grinding, they would generally leave them. As far as what you do with them, I mean, I say it with all artifacts, you just let it live where it lives. That's about it. Just let it be where it was set down, and that was the end of its little life,
Excellent. Let me chime into our viewers here. We've got some people watching from northern Colorado, all the way from Los Angeles. Welcome, everybody. Our wonderful audience out there, do we have any questions for our curator, Amanda, about Manos, Metates, anything else in museum collections? So Amanda, tell us a little bit about our collections here at Las Golondrinas, and can you tell us a little bit about the process of what that means, collections, what your responsibilities are with that, and what determines what objects we can use? Because as some of our viewers know who have visited Las Golondrinas, these are some of the most common artifacts that you'll see and actually get to try out on your own when you visit. We use them in our hands-on history programming. Tell us a little bit more about all that.
We sort of have two different types of collections. We have the collections that is, up in safe little storage. That's the beautiful Spanish colonial objects that we have, that we store safely. And then we have, like I said, the education component, which is the component that is out there in the world for all of our visitors to see and use and interpret and imagine the people of New Mexico using in their daily lives. So there are two very different kinds of things. There are these things that, for education, these could get broken, they could get damaged, they could get so on and so forth, but it's important to have them because it's important for our visitors to be able to interact with them. And then we have this stuff we really want to keep safe. Things like Spanish colonial ironwork, boltos, retablos, textiles, pottery, archaeological artifacts that have been found on property, that we want to keep safe. And so yeah, those are the two main components of my job, are the stuff that I'm like, everyone should use this and touch it and be part of it, and then the other part where we want to keep it safe, so we have that history to preserve.
Absolutely, and we sure appreciate all your hard work on that. We do have a lot of really incredible things, and we're very grateful to be able to share that in such an immersive, personal way with our visitors, and we look forward to doing that this season. Amanda, before we bring the program to an end here, we're kind of filming from a unique space today for these viewers that have been with us through all of our live sessions. This is the first time we've ever filmed here in our exhibit hall. Can you talk a little bit about the space?
Sure. So this is where we display some of the objects that we want our visitors to see that are actual factual Spanish colonial artifacts, as well as objects from native market. So behind us here we have original careta that is Spanish colonial, and some of the other objects that you would have found out here when you were working farm and ranch. And on the other side, we also have a bunch of archaeological materials from LA 20,000, which is a site that is an actual Spanish colonial site. So you can see some of the actual artifacts that came out of that site. We have boltos and retablos talking about the religious lives of New Mexicans, as well as some Spanish colonial furniture, to show folks what they would have had in their homes. So I highly recommend coming here when you come visit, because I think it's a little hidden gem and not a lot of people know it's here, but it's all the good stuff is in here.
The great thing is location is everything too, and we are right next to the museum gift shop, which Amanda has also done a lot of work on. Tell us a little bit about the exciting news we have there.
Hopefully we'll get online at some point, but I took over the museum shop 2 years ago, I guess it was, although time. Had so little meeting. But yeah, so anyway, it's just been a really fun, I was in retail for a million years before I got into archaeology, so it's been fun, like reimagining that part of my brain. I've been having a ton of fun in there, like a kid in a candy shop. So anyway, come in and see it. It's awesome.
Yes, I saw it for the first time today. There's a lot of really great, a lot of fun stuff. All right, audience, any other questions or comments from our wonderful viewers? I'm going to go ahead and rejoin you here, Amanda.
Mask on.
Mask on. I guess our wonderful audience, other good news that we have for you is that we are currently open for private by reservation only tours. So call our front desk, 505-471-2261, extension 101. You'll reach Amy at the front desk. She's our tour coordinator. She can get you scheduled for a private docent-guided tour of our site. Our buildings are clean and restored and refilled with wonderful artifacts that come from our museum collection, and they're ready to welcome our visitors. So go ahead and call, make a reservation. We'll be back with some more specific details in the next month or so, but we're anticipating and excited to be able to open for our regular season at the beginning of June. We'll make sure to communicate what that looks like, but we're really excited to be able to welcome back our guests this 2021 season. Any other questions, Vic, from our audience? All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us and spending some time on this lovely Thursday afternoon with myself, Laura Gonzalez, Education and Volunteer Manager, and our Curator of Collections, Amanda Mather. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, both at SF Golondrinas. Tell your friends, tell them to like our page, follow our page, and a nice friendly reminder that we're also on YouTube. We'd appreciate the subscription. Just look up Las Golondrinas channel. All of our Golondrinas live sessions live there as well. But just reach out if you have any questions, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.